talk about the site as it's continued to kind of get into final form, and then really give some updates, some specific kind of building form updates around the site. So we'll turn it over to Mark, and Mark, you take it away. I think we've got a video pretty early here, but you lead us into it and we'll get that ready to go.
Wonderful. Well, good evening, everyone. And as Marcus had indicated, please go out and vote. It's very, very important. But it's also very important to find out who's going to win the World Series maybe tonight. So we got Game 6 of the World Series. I know we've got some baseball fans out there with the Dodgers and the Tampa Bay Rays getting ready to play here. So hopefully we can get through this and then we can enjoy the rest of the game. Very exciting news. I see some of the people who are in the audience out there tonight were actually in attendance. But a week or so ago, we did a Pancratia Hall introduction. Wasn't really a groundbreaking, but Jim Hartman and Grant and Susan, put on a celebration. It was a wonderful celebration to start the renovation project of the Pancratia Hall lofts. And what you see on the screen in front of you is the signboard that's out in front of the building. Which shows a historic picture of Pancratia, plus it has a picture of Mother Pancratia in there, and then an old aerial, and then all the development team and the financing team that put it together. This was not a West Side project. We did participate, on the financing side of it with how we structured the sale of the building to Jim and Grant and Susan. But if you look really closely, that financing team is a number of people along. It was a very difficult project and a very difficult capital stack to put together. But I am very proud to have this as the lead-off project. What we want to show next here is a short little video. And if for some reason the video doesn't play so well, we can certainly copy it into the chat. We can certainly copy it into the chat, and you can watch it later. But it's a really great video here. Go ahead, Jasper. Sorry about that.
We're very fortunate to have this beautiful day. We'd just like to first start by holding up a pair of bolt cutters. You've probably heard the expression baton race. Well, this has been at times a marathon, and for sure it's been a baton race. We're going to pass the baton symbolically from speaker to speaker today, representing the decades of team effort that has created Pancratia Hall, as well as this opportunity to provide conversion of this building into affordable housing.
As we mark the beginning of this important work, let us lift our hearts and minds and spirits in prayer. Here we stand between the majesty of the mountains to the west and the bounty of the plains to the east. Today, we ask you, Holy Spirit, to guide and strengthen all who will labor here to prepare Pancratia Hall to be home for many who will live, work, play, and learn here.
I lived here for 4 years, and it delights me to know that it will continue to be living quarters for some blessed people. So today, I give thanks for what has been, and I say yes to what will be. Thank you.
Since 1998, we've raised over $11 billion in affordable housing dollars to invest. We expect to raise another $730 million this year, and this is a business that COVID can't stop. Affordable housing is so important, and we'll continue to find ways to deploy that.
Anyone who has worked with Jim and Susan know that they are tireless, and they redefine the meaning of work ethic. So thank you for teaching me that and showing me that.
There is no place in Southwest Denver that is more meaningful to the people here and the community here than the land on which we're standing. One of the most beautiful things that they're doing is they're giving rebirth to this building in a way that honors the legacy of and the spirit of Loretto, working families. This is not going to be million-dollar condos, folks. This is going to be housing for orderlies who work at Swedish, for first and second year teachers, for waiters and cooks in the service industry. This is what Southwest Denver is about.
We need affordable housing. This city has grown by 30% in the last 10 years and continues to grow, even in the midst of this COVID pandemic that we're experiencing. Commitment to affordable housing is something that we as a city will have to be dedicated to for the foreseeable future. Because we have to make this a city that is a city that welcomes diversity. And nothing says inclusion more than saying there is a place for you no matter where you are on the economic scale in this city. There are those whose souls we may never meet, but they're counting on us to fill the gap, to provide affordable housing, to yes, care for our homeless and the widows, and those who find themselves looking in wondering who will speak for me. And so I'm proud to be a part of a city that will always raise its hand and say, I will speak for you. Thank you to all the partners, and thank you for this wonderful project that opens up 72 affordable housing units for the most vulnerable in our city. Let's open it up. Countdown 3, 2, 1.
I'm so happy.
Well, wasn't that great? If somebody wants to watch that again, or if you'd like to post that to your social medias, the link is down below. I'm sure we can somehow share that, in the chat, and you can copy it. But it really is a wonderful presentation. And I just want to publicly say thank you to Jim and Grant and Susan, for being a part of the team and bringing, these first 72 affordable units to the Loretto Heights project, and also to the Southwest Denver. So moving on, one of the things that we continue to talk about in the redevelopment of Loretto Heights is remembering and not forgetting, where we came from on this project. And it would be remiss of me not to mention, that this project was founded really by the Sisters of Loretto 130 years ago. And just like we are taking and bringing new life back to Loretto Heights in the form of Pancratia Hall, we're also bringing new life back, and what we're going to publicly announce is our logo for the project. I think many of you have heard me say, that we find things on this project that are interesting. One of the things that we found is this really cool LH, and it's actually on the side of the Arts Building. For those of you who know where the Arts Building is at, it's behind Pancratia and just north of Matchbook Hall. It's the only place that I have found this piece of metalwork, but I think it's just really cool. And what we're doing is we're going to use this as our logo going forward on this project. So what we have labeled here as the next great chapter of Loretto Heights with the image, now we have a logo made out of it, which is the L and the H, and we do intend to use this throughout the project and inside of our publication. The next thing that when we start thinking about Loretto Heights, which I think is really neat, is we have an area plan. But now what we're going forward with is we're trying to figure out, what I would call the Loretto Festo. What are we aspiring to be, as a community, as a new village that's coming into Southwest Denver. And somehow I got feedback here. But this isn't to say that this is a final version. This is certainly open for input. But at a first blush, what we believe that we're aspiring to be is a place that connects the fabric of the neighborhoods, embraces the history of its culture, where everybody lives the way life was meant to be. So first, everyone deserves a great place to bring their family for fun, leisure, and community. We believe that living well should be a first priority. We also strongly believe in the arts, and that's rooted in the foundation of Loretto Heights with what the education that took place there. We believe in cultural openness is how we experience and learn from each other. We also want to think about clean and healthy living is what sustains us in our community. You've heard about our sustainable living as it relates to the water and the net zero homes that Thrive is trying to bring in. And for those that don't know, Pancratia Hall is a 100% electric building. It won't have any gas in it at all. And then finally, we believe that everybody deserves access to the opportunities that support life wellness. So again, these are not necessarily final, but it is certainly the direction of where we're heading as we're trying to, become embedded into this great community that already exists today. Next slide, please. So as we're thinking about Loretto Heights, I always think it's important to kind of take a step back and remember where we came from. Many of you on the call today remember the steering committee and the area plan guidance that we put together and then ultimately brought in front of City Council. This is one of the images that's inside of the area plan. It's kind of a collaboration of many thoughts and conversations that took place over the course of the year when we were doing the area plan. But just to remember, things that we talked about were the open space component, the mobility components, the view corridor components, the land use components, and also the height and how everything related to the neighborhood around. And this has been our guiding principle. And I can assure you that in all of our conversations that we've had with the city staff since that time, they really guard this area plan very tightly because this is what the community had agreed to. So the next slide. So as we start materializing our site plan, the first thing that we have been showing is the proposed mobility and open space. And this isn't anything new. This is information that you've seen before, but I do think it's one of the most important components of how the plan has come together as it relates to a road network, as it relates to all of the open space, as it relates to the historic preservation and the mobility, going throughout the whole project. One of the things that is slightly different from a version that you've seen before, and we'll get into this a little bit, for those that are very astute and have memorized this drawing, you'll notice that the road that's along the ag ditch is no longer on the north side of the ag ditch. It is now on the south side of the ag ditch, and that's very intentional with feedback that we heard from the community. And that's what we're always listening for is, what is the community seeking here? Next slide, please. So this is our proposed zoning. Again, nothing is new here, but just to reiterate, we are putting together 3 different zoning districts. We'll start with the most important one, which is the one in the middle, which is the campus PUD zoning. That is all the area that is in gray. The reason why that is a PUD, for those that aren't familiar with the terminology PUD stands for a planned unit development. And what a planned unit development is customized zoning that the city doesn't have off the shelf. Off the shelf zoning means, you have, for an example, we're going to get into this MX3 zoning. You have different residential zonings. The current zoning of the campus is actually CMP I-12. The reality was, with what the area plan suggested, there was no current zoning that the city had available that fit exactly what the community was asking for, especially since we have all the historic buildings in the campus core. And one of the things that nobody wanted was a road that went through the center of the campus. So we had to come up with special campus PUD zoning. And we'll get into this campus core a little bit more detail. But what it also prescribes very clearly is where you can and cannot build, what has to be protected, and what is the setbacks and the parking requirements and the normal things that you would see inside of a zoning document. The second zoning area has to do with this drawing that's in the yellow and the purple colors. And the reason why this is in a couple different colors is we have sub areas within this district. So it's on the western side and on the northern side there. This is also going to be a customized zoning, a PUD, and this is where our for sale residential product is at. The reason why it's in different colors is because of the area plan and the community requirements. Not all of the residential area is going to be treated the same. You may remember in conversations that we had that some of the zoning allowed for 2.5 stories, where some of the zoning allowed for 3 stories. Some of the zoning demanded that, or some of the conversation with the community demanded that we have detached single families, whereas other components are going to be attached. So although this is all one PUD, it has subsections within it. And this is the second district that we have. The third district that we have is everything that's in pink. And this is not going to be customized zoning. This is going to be zoning that the city has off the shelf. And this is called MX3, which is a mixed use -3 zoning. The U stands for 3 stories. And the only thing that's going to be different than what the MX3 zoning allows for is we have a waiver to 5 stories. As you may recall, the area plan specifically allowed for 5 stories along that federal area. So next slide, please. So one of the things that people have been asking, and although these are not, and I want to be really clear about this, these are not actual images other than the one that's in the center of what the architecture is going to look like. But what these images are representing are the different types of districts and the type of building scale that we can see. Some of these images were also found inside of the area plan document, but some of them are new that I just pulled off. But I'm trying to illustrate here that in the center is the historic campus. On the western side, you have the residential, where some will be more dense, 3-story type townhomes, but then along the Irving edge, those are going to be detached and more open, where you'll have more grassy spaces. And then over on the eastern side of the property is where we have our commercial district, where you're going to have a higher density of massing, but still with very pedestrian-free streets and areas where people can collect and enjoy each other's company. Next slide, please. So this is what our illustrative site plan looks like today. We've all seen this before, and we're staying pretty true. Not a whole lot has changed, but for some roads that we're going to talk about here in a second. But a couple things that I do want to point out to on the illustrative plan that we heard from the community that was really important to them. If we can go to the next slide, please. One of the things that we heard was the Great Lawn. And I want to put in perspective how big that lawn actually is. So if you look down in the lower right-hand corner, that lawn will be almost 1.1 acres. And that will be the entryway from a view corridor looking at the administration building. I think we can all feel very comfortable. That's exactly what the community was asking for. In fact, there was literature that came from the Loretto Heights Community Initiative that called for a 1.1 acre park in front of the administration building. And I think we almost hit that dead on. The other area that was really important that we heard from the community, and this was something that we heard from the Harvey Park, I'm sorry, not the Harvey Park, the Dartmouth Heights organization recently. And it was a very good suggestion. We always heard that on that agricultural ditch line that we wanted to make sure that we preserve that view. If you remember earlier, one of the slides, we had the arrow that went down the agricultural ditch line that showed a view corridor. The next thing that we heard, and we really started hearing it a little bit louder recently from the Dartmouth Heights, was we have a beautiful Loretto Heights Park. We want to make sure that we have a great corridor that connects it. And we want to make sure that our open space, continues on from Loretto Heights. So what you see, although it's not an illustration with pretty pictures, but it does show the different colors, the different greens and purples, and that access road that is now on the south side of the agricultural ditch. And it's hard to read all those acreages in there, But there's a couple acres of open parks, that we're going to have that's going to directly connect our park of Loretto Heights to the Loretto Heights Park and then straight into our campus core. We're trying to beautify the existing waterways and open space here. And this is straight out of the area plan and straight out of what we've been hearing recently from the community. Next slide, please.
Hey, Mark, just a little interruption here. We've had a number of people join us, so we actually have a terrific crowd. I just want to let you all know Mark's kind of running through the presentation. We will save plenty of Q&A for the end. The Q&A button, as we all live in a Zoom world now, just use that tool at the bottom. Just so you all understand, as attendees, we cannot see or hear you. So that's why we're using the Q&A buttons. If we have enough time, I'm certainly willing to have people raise their hand later and we can promote you to have you speak, but we'll get through this. Mark, you're doing great. And then we'll come back to some question and answer. So go right ahead, Mark.
Great. So the next slide that we came up to here is I wanted to show you where Thrive Homes is on their planning process. So this is the same road network with all of the different types of homes that they're planning to put into this project. There's currently 330 homes in a variety of different types. Some are attached and some are detached. And again, you can see how those homes are woven into the open space, that we're going to be providing on this project. One of the things that's pretty unique about how we're doing the zoning on this is usually the zoning comes in and then you design around the zoning that's in place. We're doing it a little bit different here. We're trying to make sure that we have the PUD and the PUD works with what the area plan says, but at the same time, we're making sure that the site plan works in it as well. So we're really happy with how this is turning out. Thrive has some amazing homes that are going to have these incredible views of the mountains. One of the things that's, very important to them is also building a sustainable home. Many, if not all of these homes are going to have net zero capabilities, when the new residents move in. And the other thing that's really interesting about these homes is that, and this was also very loud inside of the area plan, is the affordability level. We'll talk about this a little bit more towards the end of this presentation. But Thrive Homes will be providing 14 of these homes that will be deed restricted for 99 years, that will be dispersed throughout, that will be affordable, some at the 80% AMI and some of them at the 100% AMI. But then on top of that, many of these homes are also going to be affordable as a market rate with what the current market rate is in Southwest Denver today, which is still a very affordable community to live in. Next slide, please. So we showed this slide at our last community meeting, but I got some feedback from a number of people that I talked too quickly through it or it wasn't clear. So what we did with this particular slide is we made a couple of the areas in here a little bit more intentionally shaded different colors. So as an example, let's look at the center of this slide where it says quadrangle. What we want to share with the community today is that inside of the Campus Core PUD will be very specific language where you cannot build any new structures. And what you see in that lighter green area that says quadrangle, and you see kind of a black dotted line around it, that quadrangle is very specific, whereas nothing new can be built inside of that area. No new structures. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't have artwork or something like that, but certainly no occupiable buildings. I think once upon a time, you may have heard me say that we had some interest in maybe having a new food court inside the quadrangle. That was clearly not what the area plan was seeking, and the PUD will prevent it. Similarly, on this drawing, you will notice the Great Lawn in front of the administration, and then also the Great Lawn that goes all the way down to Federal. Those are also non-buildable areas that we cannot build in those areas because they will preserve the administration building. And then finally, you see a courtyard area that's down over by the theater and the library. That is also another non-buildable area. I do want to be really clear in saying that, just because these are listed as non-buildable areas and we talked about it, that doesn't necessarily mean that those are the only non-buildable areas. There's many, many other areas that are going to be non-buildable throughout the whole Loretto Heights project. In fact, one of the things that you've heard me talk about is the open space requirement. The city of Denver has a 10% open space requirement, and we will be honoring that 10% open space requirement, and then we'll have approximately another 8% on top of that. So we'll have a total of 18% of our property right off the bat when we plat our project, which will be non-buildable. There will be remnant areas, I'll call it, sprinkled throughout the project that will probably get us up closer to 24% of the buildable area, of the developable area will be non-buildable and open space. But this is just a snippet of the quadrangle area that I wanted to be really clear.
Hey, Mark,
Now,
can I just ask Mark, just a follow
Yep.
up on that, just to make sure that everybody understands that clearly. These non-buildable areas that you're showing there, the two great lawns, the courtyard, and the quadrangle, is it in the zoning document that doesn't allow that, or is it in the infrastructure master plan? Where is that housed at, so people know that that's actually something that has to be followed up on?
Yeah, that's a great question, Marcus, and thank you for asking that. So it's actually all the above. Pick C or D, I guess.
That's right.
It will be in the zoning document. In fact, an illustration that's similar to this is inside of the zoning document. Further, it is part of the IMP, and then on top of that, when we plat the project, not all of the open space will initially be platted, because we want to make sure in some of the smaller areas we've got enough wiggle room, so to speak, that we can get the designs in. But ultimately, it'll be part of the site development plan, the plat plan, the IMP, and also the zoning document. So it's in a number of different locations. So one of the things that we also talked about last week was new construction that's going to be part of the campus core. And let's talk about these two red boxes. And what I want to talk about here, you have the red box in that location, and then the red box that's over there by Matchbuff. Okay. First and foremost, I want to make sure that everybody understands this is not necessarily what we're going to do. It's just an illustration of what could happen. And this has to do with the 5-story construction that's going to be adjacent to the quadrangle. We did go over this at the last community meeting, but again, I got some feedback that people weren't following it, so I thought it was important enough that we're going to talk about it again. And the reason why, when you look at Matchbuff, where you see Matchbuff in black, but you see two red lines that are on Matchbuff, one on the front side of Matchbuff and then one on the back side of Matchbuff. Now, I want to explain what those are and how those are different than the administration building, the chapel, and Pancratia, and the priest house, as an example. First and foremost, there is going to be no exterior changes to the administration building, or the chapel, or the priest house, or Pancratia Hall. There could, however, be some elevation changes to Matchbuff Hall, but only in the areas that are not in red. What we have determined through the landmark in the city, and also from the historical inventory, that Matchbuff has some very prominent facades that need to be preserved, and that is the facade that faces the quadrangle. And then many of you remember from our meetings in Matchbuff, there is that view that goes to the west. That facade is very important. The facade that isn't as important is on, I guess, the northern side. If you know the building, that is where the loading dock is at. So there could be a new construction attached to the original building that could be configured something like the L. Not necessarily that would happen, but it could be configured that way, but it would not interfere with the two red lines. Additionally, to the south, where the pool is at, there could be a new building in the location of where the pool is. So hopefully that makes sense. And if people have questions, we can certainly come back to this at the end of the presentation. But the next slide will show, and Jasper, before you go there, just let me explain the next slide, what we're going to look at. Go back up, Jasper. Do you see that line that's labeled A, that kind of goes through the red and then goes through the quadrangle and then the administration building? That's a cross section that we're going to look at. So almost imagine if we took a big knife and chopped the quadrangle in half, right through the middle of the administration building, and then we tilted everything on its side and we were looking at it from a side angle. So if you can go to that next slide, please, Jasper. So what you see here, for clarity, on the right-hand side is the administration building. Nothing has changed on the administration building other than we cut it in half. We didn't really cut it in half, but we're just illustrating it being cut in half. And then over to the left could be a new building that would be constructed, which would show the 5 stories facing the quadrangle. And then, of course, the quadrangle has no new building inside of it. And then what I want to also point out, because it's a very, very important view plane, is that Ruby Hill view plane. Many of you heard us talk about that we cannot build anything higher than the Ruby Hill view plane. So anything that we would build, hypothetically, would have to be underneath that. And this is just illustrating a 5-story building that would be underneath that view plane. And then Jasper, the next slide is another cross section, just slightly different location on the quad, which shows just a little bit different perspective of the same thing. So hopefully this explanation was a little bit more helpful. And if there are questions, because we're moving along, at a pretty good pace here, I'm happy to come back and talk about this, at the end of the presentation. So let's move on to the next slide. One of the things that we've been hearing a lot of conversation about is traffic study. We are required by the city to do a traffic study on this project, and we have completed one. And I just want to take a minute and have people first understand what a traffic study is at a very, very high level. First and foremost, the traffic study that we did is 357 pages long. So we are certainly not going to go through 357 pages because I think by the end, I won't have a single person listening to me. But what I will do is explain it at a high level on what it is. When we initially started off with the traffic study, what we did is we went out and counted cars. I'm sure you have seen these before. You've seen those black tubes that are on the road that cars go over, and what those are actually doing is counting cars. In addition to that, they also went out, the traffic consultants, and counted cars, how many turned right and how many turned left and how many went straight on all the existing networks of streets that are surrounding the Loretto Heights project. So for an example, it counted cars going up and down Federal. It counted how many cars went east and how many cars went west on Dartmouth. Similarly, it did the same thing on Irving Street, Julian Street, and Dartmouth Street on the west side of the project. And then what the traffic study did is it then projected, without Loretto Heights, being a development that has been developed, it projected forward, pretending that Loretto Heights didn't exist, and said, what does the traffic count change to in year 2040? So they looked around at the existing landscape and what future developments they knew about and areas that could be developed, and made some projections to what is the natural impact of traffic between now and 2040. And then on top of that, they layered in what the program is for Loretto. And many of you have heard me talk about, for an example, there's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 1,200 new residential development units that are going to come in. So they took the number of residential units new, and they took the number of commercial, the number of retail, and then also took into consideration that the theater is somehow figured out over the next 4 years to come back to life. And they made a projection on what the traffic volume is going to be from Loretto Heights, not only the number of people coming, but the number of people that are going. And then ultimately, then they did a disbursement of how are these people coming to the site, whether they're coming down Irving or Federal or Dartmouth or whatever way, and then they disperse the traffic throughout the project. And then ultimately then made the same projection, what does that traffic flow look like today? And then what does that traffic flow look like in the future? So what we did then is we took that traffic information and shared it with the city and made a number of suggestions to the city as to where we thought we wanted stop signs and ways to reduce the traffic flow and make Loretto Heights a very safe and pedestrian-friendly environment. And what we originally started with was everything that you see on this diagram where all those little stoplights are or stop signs are on the project. Unfortunately, and we'll talk about the external streets here, but on the internal streets, the city is only going to allow us to put stop signs at the ones that I have circled in blue or in red. So some of those other locations, even though we wanted to have stop signs at them, the city is not going to allow us to put stop signs. There is an existing stoplight that's over at Federal and Dartmouth today. That intersection will be expanded to allow for better turning movements with the school that's currently there today. It doesn't quite function all that well. And then we are proposing that we're going to put a new stoplight, and the city and CDOT are agreeing to it, up at Bates Avenue, which is at the top of the screen over there. There will not be any signalized intersection at Cornell, which is the one that's in between Federal and Bates. Right there. That will actually be only a right in and right out scenario, meaning that you can't even make a left-hand turn in that location. So you'll have to stop coming on to Federal, of course, but traffic on Federal will not stop. And then we want to talk about the Irving Street, Julian Street side. So first, let's go to the next slide. One of the things that we heard loud and clear from the community that this illustration clearly depicts, and this was, I think, the very first thing that I heard from anybody before we even bought the property, is Dartmouth cannot go through. So we are very happy to report that Dartmouth does not go through and connect from Federal over to Irving and Julian area. So I want to make sure that everybody sees that and understands that, and that community wish is 100% solidified. The next thing and the next slide I want to talk about is what happens at Irving and what we call Road H. And Road H is the road that's just to the south of the agricultural ditch line. So if you can go to the next slide to me real quick, Jasper. So here we are as an illustration, and again, it's not very pretty, it's kind of boring, but what we want to show on this diagram is a couple different things. First and foremost, Road H is on the south side of the agricultural ditch, and there will be pedestrian and bicycle paths that will amplify and beautify the ag ditch line. But when you go over to Irving, you will notice is that we are going to put traffic calming measures in. If you look real closely at Irving, you'll see two diamond looking shapes that are on Irving right at Road H. Those are going to be medians that are put in. And then in addition to that, we will be putting in what's called, it's not a hawk crossing. You guys have all seen it. It's a pedestrian crossing where you push the button, the lights flash and require the cars to stop. So although we won't have a stop sign on Irving Street, we will have the capability for somebody who wants to cross to press a button, have all those lights flash and require the car to stop so they can safely cross that intersection. We believe that with that median put into Irving, which will reduce the width of Irving as far as the drive lane, in addition to the crosswalk signs and lights, and then ultimately painting the parking and the bike lanes up and down Irving, it's going to make for a much better traffic calming environment and a safe pedestrian environment. The other thing too worth noting on this drawing is that There is a little bit of reconfiguration on the sidewalk on the west side that we're going to have to do. So there's a natural sidewalk that connects connects the Loretto Heights Park to the Loretto Heights campus. Next slide, please. The next area that we want to talk about briefly is what's happening at the other two intersections that we have on Irving, Julian, and down further south on Julian. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So at these connections here, they will be slightly different. They are not currently proposed to have those pedestrian lights and crossings there. They will be currently limited to a stop sign that's on Road A, which is the road to the north there, and then Road G, which is the road to the south. Traffic will be able to continue on a free flow up and down Julian, just as it does today. The difference would be a new painted bike lane would come into play, as well as the on-street parking, which currently exists today but is not utilized. Okay, next slide. So we're getting towards the end of our presentation here, and I'm sure there's lots of questions that people have, and I'm excited to get into those, but just want to finish up with the community benefits for the project. And this information has been relayed before, but as you know, the current zoning today is that CMPE 12, and we talked about the new zoning that we're going to. The area plan was very clear in asking for a down zoning of the property, and the good news is you're going to get exactly that. Whereas Jasper, if you could turn the slide really quick to the next slide. Whereas today, the property could currently be developed for 9.4 million feet of development. Our development that we're going to bring in will amount to less than 2 million square feet. So not only does this protect open space, not only does this help with the traffic, amount of traffic, it just provides for a more neighborhood-friendly environment at the end of the day. And then I have one more slide here to talk about community benefits. On the next slide here, please. So this is also where we've landed on this project. And again, most of this isn't new, just getting down to more specifics. As it relates to the historic preservation, the administration building, the chapel, Pancratia Hall, the priest house, Match Buff, the library, the theater, and the cemetery are all buildings that are going to move forward and will all be very clearly documented inside of the PUD for the campus core. We're very proud of our affordable housing measure, whereas we're providing 12% of all of our DU stands for dwelling units. 12% of all the dwelling units on the campus will be deed restricted affordable. So to put that in perspective, if we end up having 1,200 dwelling units, 144 of those dwelling units will be affordable. And something that I want to point out, and I know it's kind of an eye chart here at the bottom, if I were to look at the current city ordinance and look at the affordable housing build alternative, the ordinance only requires me to build 30 income restricted units. So we are almost 5 times more than what the ordinance requires. And I'm very proud of that. And that includes a lot of it being front end loaded on the first phase with Pancratia Hall, with what Thrive is doing and with what Grand Peaks is doing. And again, these are going to be deed restricted for 99 years versus the 60 years. Many of these are going to be large family style houses or units. And then lastly, all the commercial development that we will be putting in this project will still pay the normal linkage fee. And then lastly, on the open space, we talked about the 10% required and the 8% additional bonus, which got us to our 18% that we were talking about. But we're also going to agree to do a cash donation to the city for some improvements to the Loretto Heights Park next door. We don't have a finalized number yet with the city. We're still negotiating that out. but it'll be somewhere around the neighborhood of $300,000. The city is telling me that they're going to couple that with city funds from a recent bond issuance to get to about $900,000, which is going to provide for $900,000 worth of enhancements just at the Loretto Heights Park. And I encourage you, once we get through all this, to reach out to your councilman and make sure that you guys have input for how those enhancements are being implemented on that park, because it is your park. Next slide, I think, is the end. And this is our question and answer session. So we got through that in about 45 minutes, and we have about 45 minutes to talk about anything that I may not have talked about, or any questions that you have. I'm happy to go back and clarify anything that you may want to see again. So I guess, Marcus, I'll turn it back over to you.
That's great, Mark. Thank you very much. And yes, we got through that just great. 45 minutes. We got plenty of time for questions. I've got a couple here, but I will encourage people to use that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen there to give us additional questions. We can go back to the slides and go through it. This is probably more of an observation that the original logo that we showed of Loretto Heights was kind of a softer, rounder, and maybe a little less linear. Mark, I assume you kind of went through a process or liked the linear edges on that, but maybe just a little feedback on that logo to now the proposed logo for the site.
Yeah, the good news is that we haven't chiseled it into anything. The first image that you saw was actually a photograph of some metal work that we found on the project. And we took it and tried to bring it forward into what a logo could be for the project. Certainly more than willing to take input from anybody if you have recommendations on it.
Great. It's still just such a great remembrance and really pulling that back into the site. So I think that's really an important part. I'm going to skip down to one. Mark, will the city allow any other traffic calming measures along Irving and Julian? So does the city allow any other kind of traffic calming devices?
I'm sure that the city would be willing to talk to you about it. I'm not sure about, like, if they're referring to like a rumble, like a bump, like those speed bumps, those I can tell you that the city just doesn't allow. But what I can tell you is I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with what I spoke of at that road age crossing. In addition to a bike lane being painted, in addition to on-street parking, which is going to give the illusion that the street's going to feel a little bit more narrow. And then the other thing that's going to happen to help with traffic calming is just the new street trees that will be going in, and those kinds of elements. If you have other ideas that you're thinking of, I'm definitely open to hearing about them and bringing those ideas back to the city. I honestly don't have any input as it relates to traffic calming. The city really tells us what we're going to do.
That's great. And the only thing I would add to that, Mark, is also thinking about that edge, the campus edge, if you will, of the site. Now having homes facing that, I think that's also kind of a traffic calming measure for sure, just to really close that street in. But Ray, we understand your question. We'll go back through that with the city. I think that's something we're very cognizant of as well, right? To have that be a much slower, more pedestrian friendly street. So Sister Gage asked that she had some questions about the affordable housing slide regarding the Thrive and Grand Peaks. So Sister Marinelle, we may take a run at that. And then if we don't clarify it, let us know. So let's go back, Jasper, to the slide, please, that shows just, I think that, Mark, is that what shows the affordable housing best?
Yep. Yeah, the second to last one there.
So I think,
Oh,
and
there
just,
we
yeah, we'll go through it. That's perfect. Maybe I'll just add this and then Mark provide any further clarity on it. The overall, the first two lines there are 12% of the overall development, the dwelling units, will be affordable, right? So then we break down in the first phase of the project, that includes all 72 residences in the Pan Hall lofts, and then 14 Thrive for sale. So just being being clear about that, Sister Mary, now 14 of those units will be restricted for sale, but be affordable. And then that also then transitions to Grand Peaks, which are the apartments there. The 26 of those units will be affordable, embedded throughout the site. So Mark, any other detail that you'd like to add maybe about the Thrive, how that is done? Is it all in one area? Is it spread throughout the site? What are the thoughts about those 14 units?
Yep, that's a great question. First and foremost, they will not be clustered into one spot. They will be dispersed throughout. And so what does that actually mean? It means that if that home, when somebody buys it under a deed restriction. So when they buy it, it has to stay affordable, and it can only be financed to somebody who meets certain criteria from an income level. No different than the income level criteria that people will have to meet in order to live in the Pancratia Hall lofts. These particular homes and these units that are within the Grand Peaks, and then others on future phases, you have to meet certain criteria in order to live there. And that's basically how it works. I don't know, did that answer your question, Sister Mary? No?
I think that's great. Sister Nell, come back to us if we didn't. While you're responding, maybe I'll go to this. There's a question, Mark. When is the groundbreaking? I bet you'd love to answer that question.
Yeah. The honest to God answer is I don't know. And so where are we in the process? And maybe this is a good segue. I intentionally didn't put a schedule on here because I thought the presentation was long enough, but high level, we still think that we can get to city council for a city council vote on our zoning in February, which would then mean that we could get our plat and civil CDs, finished up sometime in March. And then that would mean April time period is when we're actually, quote unquote, moving dirt, putting roads and utilities in. So I would say April time period. However, as you know, we did, kind of break ground with Pancratia Hall, with what's happening there. And then also, as we talked about at the last community meeting, we did start the demolition project for Walsh and Marion Hall, which it's hard to tell that we're doing anything because it's all the asbestos abatement that's happening. And the physical removal of the buildings will probably take place in December.
So a couple of things I'd like to add on there. There's a comment here from Sister Gage she'd sure wish to commend Jim, Susan, and Grant on the Pan Hall redevelopment ceremony. I would join her in saying that was such a remarkable ceremony. And frankly, thank you to Sister Gage, Sister Lydia Pena. That was terrific to have you all involved in that as well. It was really a special ceremony. I don't know if all of you saw it, but you saw the video clip earlier. The mayor, the councilman, the planning director. It was really great to see the city leadership show up for that event. So congratulations to all. There was a follow-up question about the Pan Hall lofts, and are they rental or for sale? Just to clarify, those are rental units in Pancratia. So I just wanted to make sure and show that. There was a question earlier, Mark, that I inadvertently skipped over. So I'm going to go back up there. It's more of a comment, I think. It says, some of us talked about view planes, not corridors. So Mark, my guess is that refers more to kind of where you were showing some of the heights. And some of us talked about view planes, not corridors. I think we probably talked about both items, but maybe do you want to just kind of address that comment? Some of us talked about view planes, not corridors.
Yeah, so two different concepts here. When I think of view planes, I think of planes, that are parallel to the ground, where you can't build above it. Like the Ruby Hill view plane is a plane that you cannot encroach upon or go higher than. And we illustrated on one of the drawings. The other thing that we talked about are view corridors. And view corridors, were heavily discussed in the steering committee meetings and also embedded into the area plan, and now also really brought to realization with our site plan and into the PUDs. So as an example, one of the view planes that was important was the view from Federal looking at the administration building. And that's ultimately how we ended up with having that grand lawn in front of the administration building. Another view plane that was very important was the view plane coming down the agricultural ditch line from Irving, as an example, or from the Loretto Heights Park. And as you saw in some of those illustrations, we do plan on having open space and preserving the agricultural ditch and the pond that's there today, and continuing that on all the way into the quad, so that line of sight will never be lost. Similarly, there's a view corridor, that goes to the southwest. If you know the site well, you can think about the area that's in between the swimming pool and the steam plant is also another view corridor that will exist. And then, lastly, there's view corridors that go through buildings that exist there today. Many of you probably recognize that Matchbuff intentionally had big glass windows on the front of it and big glass windows that were right through that lobby there. And that same view corridor will also exist. So there is a difference between the two. One of them, in my mind, speaks to height, and the other one speaks to, being able to see into the campus forever.
Terrific. A question about the traffic study. When we showed that earlier, Mark, did the traffic study, when you had to complete that, did that include Dartmouth Avenue east of Federal? So moving off the campus to the east, was that included?
Yeah, only to the extent, yes, it was, but only to the extent of the intersection of Federal and Dartmouth. What we did study there is we studied the existing traffic movement that exists today, and the car counts that exist today that go north and south on Federal and then go east and west on Dartmouth there. It didn't, so to speak, go down Dartmouth and look at the intersections going down Dartmouth.
Great. Okay, that's more than fair. I'm just looking at that. I'm going to come back to another question about affordable housing. A couple of people have asked us to get the most current layout of the property electronically. So I'm just going to ask Mark, or excuse me, Jasper, if you could put my email or Mark's email in the chat. If people want to do that, they can absolutely email us and we'll send it right over to you. Just to remind us, and we'll send it to you. So no problem with that. So I think there's a question in asking us if we could go back to the Thrive slide to discuss further the various colors and locations. I think that's the site plan, probably that's the right slide. So Mark, can you give us a little background, maybe just on what some of those colors mean there?
Yeah, by chance, is Brad on the phone? Is Brad out there from Thrive? I wasn't sure if he was able to make it or not.
Brad is here.
There he is.
Go right ahead, Brad. You lead us through it.
Yeah, so the different colors just designate different types of homes that we're proposing to build. Kind of on the north area there, we have an assortment of 3-story row homes and 2-story homes that are adjacent to the existing neighborhood there. And then as we move to the west, we have a couple more of those 3-story homes and 2-story homes. The 2-story homes we're buffering again against Loretto Heights Park. And then we start to do what we call pull apart townhomes, but they essentially look like more urban, taller, skinnier, smaller lot, single family detached homes is what we're proposing, which we're really excited about because they'll be able to incorporate the views of the mountains, and then also they help with the topography of the site. Each of those homes eats up about 10% of the slope, and then so those are kind of in the light pink and the dark and the orange there. So you have an uphill one of those, and then you have a downhill. And then there, what we're calling kind of by row G in the southwest part of the site, we have kind of an assortment again of all of those. So again, we're super excited to attempt to get to a Department of Energy net zero ready kind of energy efficiency rating for all the homes if we can.
So Brad, have a follow-up question. I know previously you had promised giving away or raffling away one of these houses to an attendee at a neighborhood meeting. Do you know what color that one is? And can you go into detail on that? Sorry, Brad, maybe we
No,
lost you on that one.
yeah, I'm breaking up here, Marcus.
I
But we
apologize. Maybe, yeah.
I mean, we're excited, and anyone that would like to do a tour of any of our Thrive homes throughout the Denver metro area, I would love to personally do that with y'all. So just I can leave my email in the chat box, and would love to show you what we're really proud of doing, both from an affordability standpoint. The same homes that we're doing as affordable are the same homes that we're doing at a price point that's higher than that. So we're really proud about that and being involved in this project.
One thing I'll say here, and this is probably a little bit more of almost an editorial comment, but seeing a lot of these communities, I will say it is really remarkable to have this small area plan and then to go through this process and lead to a tailored zone district. What you get in the end is you're actually zoning around kind of a site plan. So I hope everybody just kind of understanding this process. Usually a zoning is more on bubble diagrams. You don't have any idea what the type of units will look like, and you never have this kind of specificity. So I think it's really pretty remarkable the way the city processes work, that we're actually talking about the zoning that brings forth specific units, and we actually get to see that. So I just want to provide that detail that I think this is much more specific than you'll see in other developments. A following question was, or a statement, and I'll read the first part. Very excited about the inclusion of for sale homes in the affordable housing and financial support of the improvement and connection to Loretto Heights Park. So congratulations to all on that. Wondering when the process is, or when that'll start, Mark, to start digging in and talking about the kinds of services and commercial uses that are going on, whether it's in the campus core or that federal transition there. How does the community, or how do you anticipate that down the road the community will be involved in some of those discussions?
Yeah, that's also a wonderful question. Thank you for who asked that. I'm not seeing the questions here, but thank you. So that is a coming soon comment. And we are so busy trying to get our arms wrapped around the zoning and the site planning and figuring out, how are we preserving trees and open spaces. We just haven't gotten to the commercial uses yet. And not to say that we should be there or shouldn't be there now. It's just, we're just simply not there yet. One of my dreams that I have for this project is to bring the administration building back to life as two different uses. One of the uses is the top 3 floors, where those are going to be some sort of a senior housing project is what my dream is. And then the lower 2 floors, are our version of what Union Station kind of is in downtown Denver, where you have this big community center, in it, where people can come and gather on the inside, and you've got this micro retails and maybe a restaurant. But I also think that's a perfect location, where we have some of these community benefits that can go in there from different businesses or services that are so desperately needed, especially in these hard times, with what's going on with this pandemic and all the craziness out there. So we do understand that it's very important. We do understand that part of the lifeblood, that's going to make Loretto Heights great is something for everyone. And we do really know that these types of services and commercial uses, especially the local ones, are going to be very important. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to pull that together just yet. But I do know that in future community meetings, we will be looking for input from different organizations and how they can participate here.
Great. And I'll just pass it on. Gail Bell asked that question. It is a great question. I think, Gail, one thing we can promise, because I know the process, it's the zoning and the site plan, SDP plan. But I think what we want to do is continue to have that neighborhood engagement. So we hear you, we understand that, and we'll find, as Mark just kind of detailed, a way for neighbors to continually be involved in that process. So that's maybe a little to be determined. You're right, it's a little early, but we certainly understand that. So Sister Gage passed on on that in the pancratia or the pan hall ceremony, Councilman Flynn highlighted the beautiful, so beautifully, the legacy of the campus itself, of this remarkable place. And many thanks for him. So Dana, please pass that on. I know the councilman had to go to attend another neighborhood meeting virtually. So if you would please pass that along to him. I do want to say a few questions here, Mark, that we're going to go on kind of the Irving Julian corridor. Jasper, if you want to go to that slide. So first for Mark Upshaw, thank you very much on behalf of Dartmouth Heights for moving that road H, south of the Hillcrest and moving it south of the Ag Ditch. That was really critical. And we appreciate Mark. That's been a big feedback from him as well. Will there be street trees in the tree lawns on Irving and Julian, Mark?
So when you say street trees, there will be street trees. We will be putting street trees on the west side of Julian and Irving. One of the things, and I'm not, I think this is how it's landed. It's been going back and forth, whether or not the sidewalk on Julian and Irving is attached or detached. It's currently attached to Irving right now, and attached means it's adjacent to the curb line.
The curb line.
But regardless, we are planning on planting all new trees going up and down Irving and Julian on the west side of the road. Yeah.
Great. And then this is a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the first point, is what's been so amazing and beautiful about this project is that, when we set off with some ideas and how those ideas change from community input, again, it's as Mark Upshaw, who and I had a lot of conversations about this Road H. And Mark, I do really appreciate the vigorous debate and that you presented and that we talked about. But it's those kinds of conversations that I definitely welcome. And I want to encourage anybody who's got ideas, to please bring them forward. I will meet with you. I will talk to you. I will answer any phone call or email that you have, because that's how we make a great development like what Loretto Heights is going to be.
Completely agree. So Dana, this may be a question for Councilman Flynn moving forward, but the follow-up question to that is, will city funds support other traffic calming features that may become necessary as the effects of increased traffic become evident over time? I think one thing I can just add to that, Mark, and you certainly know the process, Mark Upshaw, is that you're right. What is going to happen is at the full build out of the campus, if you will. Of course, there needs to be a reanalysis to see what that impact is on Irving and Julian. So I think that's something that we will maintain. It's certainly something we're going to be interested in. So you're gaining a partner in that discussion. Perfectly fine to kind of point that to Councilman Flynn. So we'll come back to that, or I'll remember to ask him at our next monthly meeting. But we would agree, and we'll certainly make sure that the city continues to find ways to deal with offsite traffic issues as those arise. Mark, on the other side, Mark Wachevich, on the other side of the campus, what is happening on the Excel decel lanes that were proposed along Federal? Any update on that?
Yep. Yeah. Nothing of certainty yet. And just to, so for people who don't understand the question, there has been a lot of vigorous debate on Federal as it relates to whether or not Federal should have turn lanes coming into Bates, Cornell, and Dartmouth. So if you were traveling south on Federal, rather than having to slow down in the existing lane there today and then make a right-hand turn into the development, CDOT is asking for us to put in what's called deceleration lanes. And what a deceleration lane allows you to do, you've seen them, is you can kind of pull over. It's a tapered lane. You can slow down, and then you can make your turn going into the development. There's mixed feelings on whether or not those are the right things to do. On one camp, people like deceleration lanes, people like CDOT, who are in the business of moving cars as quickly as possible through an area, which allows for cars to get out of the way and the cars behind them, to continue on at the rapid rate of speed that they're moving at, versus other people and some of the city's philosophies that are out there with this Vision Zero, which is more about slowing traffic down and making for more pedestrian friendly environments. So we have been pushing to not put these deceleration lanes in order to provide it as a traffic calming measure on Federal to help slow traffic down. And the other reason why, we are against these deceleration lanes is that it actually makes, if somebody's trying to cross Federal Avenue, it actually makes the pedestrians or the bicyclist travel distance to go from one side of the street to the other side of the street much wider, because now you've got additional lanes that you're trying to cross. So we have been pushing against it. The city has been pushing against these deceleration lanes. There is not a final verdict on it. I believe that the councilman has been going out to different RNOs and asking them to write letters of support if they're in support of it. But that's kind of where it stands today. Our project does have provisions in it from a site planning exercise that will allow for the real estate to be deceleration lanes if they're required. If they're not required, we're not going to build the buildings any closer to Federal. What ends up happening is we just provide for a wider pedestrian experience along Federal, which I think which is what we need anyways.
Terrific. Folks, I'm going to call a little bit of an audible here. We're at 7:10 or 7:12. So I'm going to go maybe 10 or 15 more minutes. I think we're working through most of these questions. One of them, an additional one, Mark, is there any contemplated senior housing on the site, or is that perhaps in a future phase?
Yeah, not in the initial phase. The initial phase will have, the Pancratia, the market rate housing, which is open to seniors, in both cases, both Pancratia and Grand Peaks with what they're doing and with what Thrive's doing, but not a dedicated senior housing project. I do have a dream to turn the administration building, into a senior housing project. It's just a dream right now, but that's, again, how everything starts with just an idea. So ultimately, I do think there's room for a senior housing project somehow in this project, but we don't have one defined at this time.
Great. I think that's terrific. Just a clarification, Mark, when you were talking about the street trees and the tree lawn, the attached sidewalk, you said on the west side, just to be clear, you meant on the west side of Irving and Julian. We will have it on the west side of the development as well, over on Federal. Basically, the answer to that is all of the new streets, right, that come in, perimeter streets, we certainly will have street trees. That's one of the requirements in working with the city on that. So, Ray, that actually goes around kind of all the site. But yes, on the west side of Irving and Julian, we will be putting in sidewalks and street trees there as well. I'm going to ask Brad to do a favor here. There was a request maybe to follow up and go through a little more detail about the colors and those housing units. I'm going to be honest, the screen is a little blurry, and I don't think we're ever going to get full clarity on that. So if you could send that to Sister Mary Nell and then make that available. If anybody else wants to see that diagram where you can go through it, I can assure you if you could see it clearly, you can actually kind of lay that out. The one thing I'll just make clear about that is Brad and Thrive have designed different types of units to really face the appropriate street. So they have a unit that's designed to really border and face Irving and Julian, and then they have uphill and downhill townhomes. And they really talked about, or product, how they've designed that to really fit the topography. So Sister Gage, we will be happy to send that over to you so you can go through that in a little bit more detail. Mark, a question for you. What about the city adding medians? Is there any discussions of them adding medians like they have down South Federal as that traffic calming measure, so not to invite crossing at non-signalized intersections? Has there been any discussion primarily probably along, I guess you're saying at Federal or perhaps on Irving as well?
To my knowledge, no medians on Irving other than at the crosswalk that we were talking about going into Loretto Park. As it relates to Federal, as you guys know, that there's a larger project that's happening that's, bringing medians down Federal, that the funding stops, north of Loretto Heights. I envision, sometime in the future, there'll be funding to get the median all the way down, I'm assuming to 285 in Sheridan, but I don't have a timing on that.
Okay, great. I am rolling through, and I think we're getting. Here's one more. Mark, the Great Lawn, which I think runs east-west out to Federal. How wide is that Great Lawn there?
Yeah, roughly about 115 feet.
And then obviously in front of, so the Great Lawn you kind of showed in front of the admin building running north-south, that then is probably 75 to 80. Is that what that is? Somewhere in there?
No, it's 115 wide from Federal all the way up to the administration building.
Okay, great. All right, very good.
Yeah.
And let's see if I
So
have
if I
any-
could do my math right, to get to an acre, it's whatever that distance is from Federal to the administration building is 450 feet or something like that. I mean, it's a large area, and that doesn't take into consideration, that's just the lawn. You have the street on the side of it, and the sidewalk on the other side of it with whatever that building is going to be there. So it's a very large area.
Okay, great. I'm going to give folks, if you have any last questions, I think we're about out of questions here to answer. So if you do, please load them up into the Q&A magic button there. And otherwise, we're probably going to end a few minutes early so people can go watch the rest of the World Series game. So I will give you a minute.
Tampa Bay's up 1-0.
There we go. That's it. So I will finish maybe on this question. There was a question about what are the next public steps, things that the public will be involved in. We're going to get back to everyone. As you all know, we do this meeting now on the last Tuesday of the month. That's probably really close to Thanksgiving. So we will come back on picking a date and pick that out. But I think we'll certainly have another meeting in November. I think the next formal public meeting is probably that we go through the zoning process. As you all know, that triggers a hearing at the planning board or planning commission in Denver. So that will be noticed. Everyone, we will go through the same process of notifying everyone. And there will be a public hearing to really talk about those 3 separate zone districts that Mark has gone through. So that's our anticipated next public meeting where people could testify on that. But we'll certainly have more details about that in the coming weeks. That's not finalized. That could be months away. But I'm just kind of putting that out there. So what I know is that we will get back to everyone with a date for our November meeting. Mark, I'm going to offer you a chance to maybe any closing words here, and then I'll close out the meeting.
No, I mean, first and foremost, I'm just looking at the number of participants. We have 38 participants that are there, and I'm looking at all the questions, Marcus, that you went through. So thank you. And thank you to everybody who is joining. I know this is taking time out of your personal life and, with your family. But I can tell you that we are listening. I can give you study after study and person after person who has come to us, with a concern or a question, and I can assure you that I will answer them. I can't promise you that I will always give you the answer that you would like to hear. Sometimes questions, and answers, just conflict with each other, but I can tell you that we are listening. And what we want to do is you guys have an amazing community in Southwest Denver. I have got to meet so many different people, and I've got to know you guys as individuals, and it's really meant a lot to me. And even the cards that some of you sent me recently when I had my surgery. So thank you. But at any rate, you're part of my family, and I want this development to be great. I owe it as the steward to the Loretto Heights campus to make sure what the sisters started 130 years ago and the impact that they've had to this community, not only the boundary of the community of Loretto Heights, but the ripple effect, throughout Southwest Denver, throughout all of Denver, and candidly through Colorado and the United States is just mind-boggling to me of the stories that I've heard. So thank you very much to the sisters that are on the phone. But please bring your questions to me, and we want to make a great project for you.
I think I could have never said it that well. So thanks, Mark, for that. There have been one or two other comments come in, so I will address those probably via email. There's a gentleman that said he did not get an emailed question addressed. So I apologize if I've missed those. Mr. Brown, I will follow up directly so you get answers to those questions. And I'll promise you that we'll bring those questions to the next meeting. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap up the meeting. I want to thank everybody very much for attending and spending time with us tonight. We will have a November meeting. I will get that date all to all of you. So have a wonderful fall season here, and we'll see you in November. Thank you very much. Good night.